Hi everyone, my name is Marne Titchenell. I am the Extension Wildlife Program Specialist for The Ohio State University's College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences. I just wanted to say hello, share my face for a moment. I was invited to share a presentation on woodland cavity nesters, and I'm very happy to be a part of this year's Ohio Bluebird Society Conference. So let's get started. Okay, so these are the species I will be talking about today. Yes, there are definitely additional species that are not included on this list, but I only had so much time. So sorry if I didn't include a species you were wanting to learn a little bit more about. But I'm sure many of you can already identify the species shown here, but in case you are unfamiliar, let's go around and identify them. So starting right here, we have our Carolina chickadee, and then we have the white-breasted nuthatch. We have the great crested flycatcher, and this snappy little bird is the tufted titmouse. And finally, we have the Carolina wren. So let's get started, and we're gonna try to have some fun with this. Unfortunately, we can't all be together in the same room this year, but I like to try to make these recordings as interactive as I can with the recorded PowerPoint, so play along if you'd like. For each of the species, I'm going to start by putting up some of the pictures of their nests and eggs, and you can then play along and see if you can guess which species it is. So you're looking at the pictures here of the first species. Now, the nesting material of this species is often composed of moss and other bits of woody debris like bark chips and other fine fibers. And when the nest is near completion, it's lined with fur or hair. And a lot of times this bird will use that fur or hair as kind of like a soft covering or a blanket for the eggs when it leaves the nest, and also to help kind of conceal them and keep them warm. The eggs are white with reddish brown speckles, and there's about 5 to 8 eggs on average. So if you haven't guessed it already, we are looking at the nest of a chickadee. And so this information applies to both of our species of chickadees that we have here in Ohio. The black-capped and the Carolina chickadee are the two species we have here in Ohio. So chickadees start nesting about the time of bluebirds, maybe a little bit later, around April. Bluebirds tend to start a bit earlier. But they're done about mid to late June, as they only have one brood per year. So do be careful when you're monitoring your boxes for these guys, because the eggs can be really fragile, as they have a rather thin shell. Now, as I said, we had two species of chickadees in Ohio, the Carolina and the black-capped chickadee. And here you can see kind of a rough distribution of the two and how it cuts through Ohio. Now, note there is a hybrid zone, and within that zone where the two species ranges overlap, ID can be a little bit challenging. There can even be some hybridization going on between the two species. And sometimes the two species will even borrow or learn each other's songs. So that can make it even more difficult in that area. In a perfect world, here are some ways that you can tell the differences between the two species. Let me pop them up here. Location, as we just looked at, is of course a great one and can right away be the best way to tell the difference between these two species. So, those of you that are in Toledo will have black-capped chickadees. Those of you, for example, in Columbus are going to have Carolina chickadees. But, if you're in that hybrid zone, then there are some differences that you can look for, and that's what I kind of have listed at the bottom of the screen. So generally speaking, black-capped chickadees are a little bit larger, and they have a more defined black bib, and so that's this little area right here. Even though I will admit in this picture even, it looks like the Carolina has a, oh, I got that backwards. Pardon me. So the Carolina has a more defined bib line. That makes more sense. You can tell that's much more clean cut. So I apologize for that. The black cap chickadee, going back to this one, has a little bit more white on the wings and tail, and you can clearly see that in the picture here. And then the Carolina, going back over here, has a little bit more of a cinnamon color below on the belly. So, I mean, again, if you don't have these two side by side, it can be really hard to tell. So again, just knowing where you are geographically can really help. And then, of course, there's their calls. So black caps have kind of a slower, huskier call. Especially when they say that the chickadee, chickadee. And then their song is a little bit simpler and lower pitched. And they're the ones that say Phoebe or Phoebe. And I'm not going to make you listen to me. We're going to listen to the song right now. Okay, here we go. There's the song. Okay, so that was a black cap chickadee. And the Carolina, the song of the Carolina, I think is a little bit thinner, more high pitched. It's also 4-noted, so si, fi, si, fu. So see what you think. I'll give it a listen here. Oh, that's the call first. There it is. So sometimes, you know, if you're comfortable birding by ear, sometimes, you know, if you're in that hybrid zone, the song can be a really reliable way to tell the difference. But, you know, I always recommend, again, if you're in a location that has both species, that you kind of factor everything in if you're able to. So let's move into a discussion of chickadee habitat. They use a variety of forest types, from deciduous to mixed forests. And they're also very comfortable using forest edges as well. In the summer, chickadees, like many birds, are focusing heavily on insects, and they do make up the majority of their diet. Other parts of their diet would include mast, like berries and seeds. And in the wintertime, berry seeds and nuts can make up half of their diet, which is why you tend to see chickadees at your feeder more often in the winter. Chickadees will also form monogamous pairs in the early spring to begin their nesting season, and then they're going to select a cavity. So chickadees are secondary cavity nesters, which means that they are often going to use cavities that are excavated by other birds, like woodpeckers. They'll also use naturally occurring cavities. And, you know, they can excavate cavities on their own, but like I mentioned, the wood has to be pretty soft in order for them to do that successfully. Interestingly, they will remove wood chips from the nest site and dump them somewhere else to avoid any predators detecting where a newly excavated cavity might be. So, you know, if they are excavating their own cavity, they'll do that. Okay, let's talk a little bit about nest box use for chickadees. And maybe you've noticed this, but chickadees can be quite secretive when it comes to nest building and tending to their eggs and young. They don't tend to perch on the boxes like bluebirds and tree swallows do. So definitely a little less conspicuous than some of our other nest box users. So boxes can be placed, as you see there, under tree cover, along the edges of woods, or even near near bird feeders. They are poor competitors. So unfortunately, pretty much everyone is going to kick a chickadee out of a nest. There's even records of bumblebees kicking them out of their nest boxes, unfortunately. So if you are placing boxes along woodland edges, you might consider using a wren guard, which will prevent wrens from accessing the box. So house wrens really do like boxes along the edges of woodlands, and they're really going to key in on those locations, and they will definitely outcompete chickadees for a box. So this website I just popped up, it has some really great information on wren guards. You want to check that out to make sure you're using them correctly. Basically, they work to make the hole quote unquote invisible. So again, check out that website for more information. But like I said, it's very important to make sure you're using them correctly and to make sure that once you place them, the chickadee is still going to enter the box. You definitely, don't want them to abandon that nest, especially if there's eggs in it. Okay. So again, verify acceptance. And there is some anecdotal evidence that chickadees, black-capped chickadees in particular, may prefer wood chips at the bottom of a box. So, and we talked about that in the last slide, how sometimes they'll excavate and remove those chips, and that there might be a link to that. So that might be something that you add into your boxes, but I don't think it's necessary to attract a chickadee. Here's a bit of information on specific nest box types for chickadees and other information. So you see some of the boxes that they have been reported using. They will also use hanging boxes, which is kind of a nice little feature. Mount about 5 to 15 feet off the ground, and there's some evidence that they prefer a higher mount, a box that is mounted higher, anywhere from 8 to 14 feet off the ground, so that might be something that you try. You see the entrance hole there, 1 1/8 inches to 1 1/4 entrance hole, and that really is important to tailor nest box diameter, the entrance hole diameters to specific species, so you definitely want to pay attention to those specifications. Hole facing away from the wind as you can, just to make it a little bit more comfortable for them. 30 to 50 feet spacing between boxes if you're wanting to hang multiple boxes for chickadees. And just a little bit of monitoring advice, wait until the eggs are laid. And so I mentioned earlier that chickadees are poor competitors, and so they may, they're a little skittish, so they may abandon a nest box if they are disturbed during the nest building stage. And I think that goes back to they're just poor competitors. So it may be a good idea to wait to begin monitoring the boxes until the eggs are laid, when there's less of a chance that they're going to abandon that nest. So I just want to pause here and take a minute to tell you where I'm getting a lot of this information from. I want to give credit where credit is definitely due. This first website, I already mentioned it when we talked about the wren guards, but it is the Cialis website. It's created and maintained by Bette Zimmerman, who you are also hearing from at this Bluebird conference. And I'll just say that if you are into nest boxes, this is a site you want to bookmark. It is phenomenal. I use this site all the time. I send folks to it because Bette, she's just done such a great job at really getting some great, useful information on that site. So definitely check that out. And then the other one down there is the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's Nest Watch. So lots of great information there on nest boxes and plans for nest boxes, the birds that use them, their ecology, and a little bit of troubleshooting advice as well. Another good resource. And then, of course, I've used other published literature as well for this information that I'm sharing with you today. Oh, I popped up a few more specific sites there on nest boxes, but really the whole site is great. Okay, we are going to move on to our next species, and we're going to start out a little bit different here. I'm going to play the call of this species and see if that helps you to identify it along with these pictures. So maybe you've already identified it, maybe you haven't. This species uses damp leaves, moss, and grasses, along with bark strips and other materials to build their nests. So a little bit similar to chickadees. And like chickadees, they also line their nests with soft materials. And sometimes they are plucking those soft materials, that fur, directly from the living mammals. So these are fierce little birds. And so if you haven't guessed it already, we're talking about the tufted titmouse. The tufted titmouse, will lay anywhere from 3 to 6 eggs that are white to cream colored, and sometimes they're spotted, or they're often spotted, with like kind of like a red spot, sometimes brown, sometimes even a little bit more purplish tinted. Okay. They're going to start building their nests mid-April and finish up around July, and they will lay anywhere from 1 to 2 clutches a year. Now, these guys are one of my favorite little birds. They're fierce. I think they're adorable, but mostly just because their appearance. They just look so cute and innocent, but they're fierce. And so one of a great example of this is that the females exhibit what is called a snake display when on their nests. So they will lunge at a threat, they will hiss. So you gotta love a mama who so fiercely defends her babies. So I really wanted to show you what that snake hissing display looked like, but since this is a recording, I can't play a YouTube video during it. Copyright issues, understandably. So what I've done is I've created a short link to a YouTube video, one that I would have shown. So definitely go check it out at go.osu.edu/titmice, or titmouse, excuse me. And this is a video that was posted by Edward Plumer of a titmouse exhibiting that display that I told you about. It's really neat, and it's definitely worth a watch, and you can actually see her lunging and hear her hissing. So what you're looking at in this picture is just a clip from the video, and it is the female, and she does have young underneath her, so that's kind of a view from the top down inside of a nesting box. And so the other thing that I wanted to point out is this snake skin that you see right here, which is interesting. So some birds, like titmice, also blue grosbeak and great crested flycatchers, use snake skin in their nests. Sometimes they'll even drape them over the outside of a nesting cavity. But according to some research from Arkansas State University, the birds incorporate the snake skin into their nests to deter nest predators, like squirrels, who are themselves threatened by snakes. Pretty smart, huh? And one more reason why I really like this bird. So I mentioned that titmice line their nest with fur and other materials. Naturalists that have examined old nests have identified a number of fur from raccoon, opossum, dogs, squirrels, rabbit, horse, cow, cat, mouse, woodchuck, and even human hair. And now we know that they use snake skin as well. So I love this little picture of a tufted titmice plucking fur from a sleeping raccoon. I've talked to homeowners who have seen them do this to their dogs while they're sleeping out in the yard. And I've also heard from people that the titmice will land on their heads to pluck a little bit of hair as well. So, and there's a great picture of a titmice on a dog. So, one thing that you can do is place dog and rabbit fur in a suet feeder near nest boxes. So just kind of a little something you can do that may help provide some of that fur that they're looking for. Now, I have read that titmice do prefer to go straight to the source, but if it's easier to get, I'm sure they will take advantage of that. All right, a little bit on the habitat of the tufted titmouse. Like we saw with chickadees, these little birds can be found in deciduous and mixed forest, especially those with a dense canopy and a good diversity of trees. And that likely reflects their diet, which is composed of insects during the breeding season, just like we looked at with our chickadees, and into the winter. But it also includes a diversity of seeds and fruits from trees. And they are particularly hitting up those things during the winter. They will also eat larger nuts like acorns and beech nuts. They are secondary cavity nesters, like we looked at with chickadees, and they rarely excavate their own cavities. So they are looking for cavities that already exist out there or have been created by other birds. Now, while tufted titmice are often a common backyard bird, it is not all that common in nest boxes, unfortunately. Like chickadees, they're pretty secretive about nest building. You won't see them perching on boxes. Unlike chickadees, they are a bit feistier, as we have discussed. So they may have a little bit easier time competing for space with some of our other cavity nesters. That said, they still may have some issues with house sparrows and wrens. So, if you're really trying to get a titmouse into your box, then you might also consider using a wren guard or other protections against those species. So otherwise, locating boxes under tree canopies, or near oaks and beech, or even a bird feeder, those are all good places to place a box for tufted titmice. And so here you see some different box styles that they have been noted using. But what may be more important than box style is the height at which the boxes are placed. So observational research indicates that they may prefer higher mounted boxes, at least 6 to 14 feet high. And the lower end may even be as high as 8 feet. So that might be something that you really do consider when placing a box for these guys and gals. You see the entrance hole specifications there and the spacing between boxes, and a little bit of monitoring advice. Although they are inquisitive, titmice tend to be less tolerant of monitoring and manipulation than, say, our bluebirds and swallows, tree swallows are. So the nests, again, like we talked about with chickadees, they may be abandoned if monitoring during that nest building stages. So again, I would recommend waiting a little bit, maybe around a week after egg laying, to start monitoring those boxes. Okay, so moving on to our next species. This species uses a variety of materials to build their nests, from small twigs, leaf litter, bark, moss, and grass. Towards the back of the nest, you'll find a smaller cup lined with softer materials, and that's where the eggs are laid. Interestingly, this species seems to be attracted to glossy, crinkly materials like cellophane, even onion skin if it's accessible, and snake skin. One researcher found 75% of nests had snake skin in them. Now this was in down south, where snake skin is a little bit more prevalent. So if you haven't guessed it already, especially with the snake skin hint, this is the great crested flycatcher. So I'll play the call in just a second here. But maybe you remember some of the other species that I mentioned earlier that use snake skins in their nest. This is, again, another one. And so the song consists of sweeping whistles and kind of a low, burry vibrato, as described by Cornell's All About Birds website. And so I'll play it for you, see what you think. I think they got it right with that description. So this is the only eastern flycatcher that nests in cavities, and they nest from about May through July, though sometimes those nesting efforts can carry into August, and they lay about 4 to 8 eggs, 1 brood per year. Now, one thing I want to point out in this picture, maybe you've noticed it already, I'll get my pointer here, is right here in the center, you will see a cowbird egg in the center. Now, despite this picture, this doesn't happen very often. Flycatchers are pretty fierce defenders of their nests. Also note that the eggs of the flycatcher, the ones surrounding that cowbird egg, are creamy white, and they have this kind of pinkish purpley blotchiness to them. And I, for one, can really see that lavender shift in the pictures here. Habitat-wise, great crested flycatchers like mature woodlands with openings. They will also use edges. And in terms of their diet, you see they eat insects, other invertebrates, and fruit. Great crested flycatchers can be described as kind of sit and wait predators. So they will use perches high up in trees to kind of look for their prey before they swoop down and catch it on the wing. And this really helps them to avoid competition between other aerial insectivores, which are hunting prey lower down. So they can really hunt for those insects that fly higher up in the canopy. They often go after large prey like butterflies, moths, and dragonflies. You see here in this beautiful picture by Jonathan Pierce, this flycatcher has caught a dragonfly. And flycatchers belong to a group of birds that feed heavily on insects while on the wing. And a little bit of information on these aerial insectivores, if you're not aware. This group of birds also includes swallows, swifts, and nightjars, and all of them, including the flycatcher here, are experiencing significant declines in their populations. So this is an area that many ornithologists are studying right now to try to determine exactly what is going on. So, on that note, if you're putting out great crested flycatcher boxes, kudos to you, as well as tree swallows, because these birds really need our help right now. But getting back to things, they typically nest in existing cavities higher up in trees, but of course they will also use nest boxes. So let's talk a little bit about those nest boxes. Boxes can be placed along woodland edges, in open areas, near woodlands, with a nice clear flight path to the entrance. These photos are courtesy of Betsy Marie, so thank you, Betsy. She has had luck attracting a great crested flycatcher to her nest box. This female returned to this box 4 years in a row. So flycatchers, they can have fidelity to past sites where they have successfully nests. And this is actually not uncommon in our migratory species. If they find a breeding site that works well for them, they tend to stick with it. And so we see a little bit more information here on how they are fierce defenders of their nest. So that's good. That's good. I like to see when a bird is capable of protecting themselves and their young. They seem to prefer hanging boxes, which can also help to discourage starlings and make other access by predators a little bit more difficult. So, you can just use about a 3 to 4 inches or so of wire and hang that box so it's hanging about 12 feet from the ground. They are a larger bird and so need a larger diameter entrance hole, about 1 3/4 inches in diameter. And this diameter is large enough to allow access for a starling. So again, it's recommended that you hang your boxes to avoid that. And just a little bit of monitoring by advice, and this goes for any boxes that you mount higher up. You will likely need a ladder for these, so do be careful. But what I also find can be very handy is a mechanic's mirror. You can stick a little mirror in there, and it extends your reach, and it can be very handy. And this is also handy for, sometimes our house wrens, that fill up those boxes with sticks. Sometimes rather than, pulling those nests out to look inside of them, which, we feel is disruptive, you can just stick that little mirror in there and get a good glimpse of what's going on. And then just a little recommendation on how many boxes per 1 box per 6 acre, and that is from some literature that I found. Okay, moving on to our next species. This species is definitely rare in nest boxes, but there has been some documented use in other parts of the country, so I'm including them. Nests are composed of fir bark, grass, and other debris. Then they are finished with a cup nest of finer grass, shredded bark, feathers, and other soft materials. Eggs are white to cream with brown spots and some mottling. And I will play the call if you haven't already guessed who we're talking about here. I bet you will after this. So that was the call of the white-breasted nuthatch. To me, it always sounds like they're laughing. I don't know if anybody else thinks that, but that's what it sounds like to me. So white-breasted nuthatches will nest roughly April to June, and they will lay about 5 to 9 eggs. And they only nest once per year and rarely renest after a failed attempt. Nuthatches frequent mature, deciduous, and mixed woodlands, and like we've seen with some of our other species, they do like the edges, especially those near open areas. When it comes to diet, they like both insects and mast. During winter especially, they will store seeds and sometimes insects one at a time, somewhat haphazardly, and they'll store them under loose bark in their territory. And they typically hide the food by, covering it up with that little piece of bark. Sometimes they will even use lichen or moss or a bit of snow to hide their little food item. As far as nesting, they prefer cavities in larger trees of about 17 or larger inches in diameter. And they may use nest boxes in areas where large trees are lacking. So could be a species you try to successfully attract, but don't be too terribly disappointed if you're not able to. And unfortunately, there's not much known about nuthatch nest box use because, as we've discussed, they usually nest in trees. But I can share a few things with you. So white-breasted nuthatch stay on territories year-round, and so they may use boxes for winter roost sites as well. So, placing boxes close to the areas where you see nuthatches frequently during the winter, near bird feeders or near mass-producing trees, can be some good places to kind of put those boxes up. Mount anywhere from 5 to 15 feet high. There's the entrance hole diameter, and they may be attracted to larger holes, and that goes back to their preference towards cavities with larger holes. And then you can place 1 to 4 inches of wood shaving in the box as well to make it a bit more comfortable for them. So our last species, and I'm really giving you a huge clue right there with the picture, is our Carolina wren. And I'll play the call of the Carolina wren really quickly. I think it sounds kind of like a tea kettle, tea kettle, tea kettle. Nice little bubbly call there. So Carolina wrens, they prefer to nest in very brushy areas, open cavities, or odd places. And I'll share with you just a few of those places. You see the picture there on the right, again from Bette Zimmerman. And let me get my pointer. But right here is a little Carolina wren nest inside of a boot, and that is not an uncommon place for them to nest. There are lots of pictures of Carolina wrens nesting in a pair of boots that was left outside. There's a closer up picture. Here's a nest in a bag of mulch, and another one in a utility box. One of my favorites is a pair of pants that was hung out on a line. I had another woman tell me that Carolina wren nested in her husband's carpentry belt that he left outside on the porch. Here's a nest inside of a hose, and looks like ropes wrapped around that hose as well. So, given their propensity for odd but definitely variable nesting sites, you may get them in a nest box as well. And they have been reported using several different types of nest boxes, though not regularly. So nest boxes can be located near the home or attached to the home. They do like a larger entrance hole, and you can see that there. It's rather large. And if you go to nestwatch.org, I've already kind of referenced that site, but I'll reference it here again. You can find some nest box plans there specifically for Carolina wrens. The females are usually very tolerant of humans, as you can see in all the different places they nest, very close to humans. But the young are more sensitive to monitoring, and if you're checking that nest often when there are young birds in it, they may leave earlier than they should. So try not to disturb it after 7 days after those young have hatched. Okay, so I want to finish with a little bit of a discussion on keeping your nest boxes safe. In addition to building boxes the best that you can, which I know you all will, and properly monitoring them, there are some additional things that you can do. For starters, place your boxes wisely. So you don't want your backyard or the trail that you're placing boxes along to become an ecological trap, which is something that looks very attractive to wildlife. You know, it has the features that they're looking for in this case when it comes to nesting, but it ends up being bad for them essentially. And this picture is a good example. You know, placing your box on a tree or in a place where predators can gain really easy access to it. So, you know, you might be wondering, okay, where should I mount my boxes? So the simple answer is on a pole. Okay, they're going to be much less vulnerable to predators when they're on a pole versus on a tree or on a fence line. If you use EMT conduit rather than this wooden stake, that's going to be even better. Not quite as easy to climb. And if you're wondering, some of the common nest predators are raccoons, squirrels, crows. You see them listed down there. So wise placement of boxes. And so then in order to make sure that those young birds fledge successfully, you can work to improve your overall bird habitat, you know, not just providing that nesting site, but maybe incorporating some natural food sources into your backyard by planting some native flowers, trees, and shrubs, or non-native trees and shrubs that provide a good food source and, of course, are not invasive. So, you know, on that note, do your homework when it comes to our invasive non-native plants and make sure you are, you know, removing them if you have any of them, and definitely not planting them. Many of those non-native invasive plants provide inferior food and nesting sites for our birds. Reduce or eliminate, if possible, insecticides, or at least those that are known to have wide-ranging impacts, especially on our pollinators like the neonicotinoids. And then, again, as this picture is alluding to, keep your cats inside. If you're worried about, or if you're working to provide bird-friendly habitats, help the birds out by keeping known avian predators inside. And, you know, just a note for all you cat lovers out there, I have a cat as well. There are many dangers outside for our cats. So it's safest for our cats too to be inside. At the very least, you know, if you do have your cat outside, monitor its activity and keep an eye on it at all times. And, you know, there's other ways to keep your nest boxes safe, particularly if you are mounting them on a pole. So in these pictures here, you see some examples of a predator guard. And, you know, that can just be like you see here in these pictures. There are other ones that right here that are more cone shaped. Now, I have seen raccoons get around these, so make sure that cone shaped baffle is wide enough and not too skinny, because raccoons can get around them if they really want to. Also keep in mind, you know, if raccoons are getting into your feeders, be diligent, especially, you know, if you do happen to catch them getting into the feeders during the day. Go out and scare them, you know, yell at them, do some things like that, and that can sometimes go a long way as well to making that area uncomfortable for the predators as well. Keep vegetation around the pole trimmed. And once again, I'm going to refer you to the Cialis website because it has all kinds of great information on keeping your nest boxes safe. Just a little note to wrap things up here on the types of boxes. Try not to get too hung up on the details and specifications that I've shared. You definitely want to do your homework, visit those sites that I referred you to, but remember, birds are tough. They're likely less fussier than we are. As long as you're doing your best to offer a variety of boxes, you're choosing your locations wisely, you're monitoring responsibly, and you know, tending to those boxes, cleaning them out every year, you're going to be doing a good service to the birds. And just my thanks to all of you for everything that you're doing for the birds out there. We have a month or so before we can get back out there and start monitoring our boxes, and I, for one, am really looking forward to that. Quick note on woodland management. Remember that our nest boxes are supplemental habitat resources. They are, of course, a fantastic tool to increase the number of nesting sites for our cavity nesting birds. But remember that nothing beats the real thing. So if any of you out there own woodlands, I strongly encourage you to consider maintaining and managing for dead wood. Like, you know, the picture that you're looking at here, these trees that with age are going to develop these cavities or even have already died and have naturally formed cavities. You know, when it comes to our woodpeckers, they are specifically looking for dead wood to start forming their own cavities that will then be used by other birds. So I know this isn't feasible for everyone, and if that's the case, rock on with your nest boxes. That's a great thing that you can do for the birds. But for those of you that own woodlands and, or you know, might even have a wooded area towards the back of your property, these are just some options for you to really ante up when it comes to providing some good quality habitat for the birds. So I've included some more resources here on this slide. The link that you see there, the go.osu.edu/deadwood, is a webinar that I gave back in mid-December on the importance of deadwood for wildlife. So if you want to learn more about its importance, but also how to provide it in a woodland, check that out. And then on the next slide, I'm going to share with you some professionals that can also help you. So right here, woodland management help. These are all individuals that you can reach out to that can help you kind of set up some of those management goals, or just simply talk to you about providing some more of those deadwood resources. So once again, special thanks to Bette Zimmer, Keith Cridler, Betsy Marie, and the Macaulay Library at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology for terrific information and for pictures. And there's once again some of the sites that I recommend you checking out. And there's my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. I know, not being in person, we don't have that opportunity to ask questions. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have some questions on any of the information that I covered. I hope you all enjoy the rest of the conference, and thank you so much for the invitation. Happy spring, happy early spring to everyone. Thanks again.